Good afternoon. Listen, the bells are ringing. For this day's tidbit, it's perfect because today's tidbit speakers are in their home office near to Rådhuspladsen. So welcome once again to today's tidbit, where we will have a huge menu of decarbonization. It's actually an a la carte menu. And the a la carte menu is about a status, how it's going with the maritime decarbonization. And our two guests today, they will spice it up with how stakeholders, opportunities and startups can give a wonderful source to this maritime carbonization. So I will pass over the floor or the stage or the scene or the window to Sofia and Conor from the Decarbonization Coach. So welcome to today's tidbits. I'm looking very much forward to be an expert in maritime decarbonization. Welcome Sofia Fürstenberg. Welcome Conor. Stott, you have both a long career at Maersk before starting up your consultancy Fürstenberg Maritime Advisory. And Sofia, you have also been an advisor to North Shipping, where you, what was it? It was ocean economy that you were dealing with for them, making a huge what was it, a track or about the ocean economy. It was very interesting, but we are not going to talk about that one today. Let's get straight to the topic, maritime decarbonization. Good luck and have a wonderful tidbit, everyone out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta, and thank you, MDC, for this opportunity to talk about our passion, decarbonization. And now that the bells have finished ringing outside, maybe you can hear us. If anyone has trouble, please let us know. So we're going to take you through a 4-part menu today with a starter, main course, dessert and a wine pairing. We'll have a look at the current status of maritime decarbonization, the main options for action, the opportunities through coalitions, and the opportunities through working with startups or between startups and the corporate world. But let's start by setting a bit of context. Maritime trade is thousands of years old with a very well-established commercial mechanism. And it has in the past gone through a number of transitions, most notably the change from sail to fuel-propelled vessels, and more recently the containerization revolution. But this transition we're facing now is like nothing it's ever seen before and more profound. And there are some very fundamental differences between this transition and the ones that have gone before. First and foremost, there's no competitive advantage, certainly at the moment, to trying to move to alternative fuels. You can argue that, but overall, if that's the case, there's an uncertain technological basis. There's a very difficult regulatory pathway involved. It's also occurring as part of a global energy transition. It's not exclusive to shipping. And there's very high urgency and lack of clarity on the path to follow. But let's also not forget about fossil fuels. The recent DNV GL Energy Transition Report is stating that by 2050 we'll still be using something like globally 40% of fossil fuels. Now, of course, that all remains to be seen, but they're going to be very prominent for a long time, and very important to actually enable the transition to take place in the first place. And we also need to make sure we harvest the incredible talent and skills from particularly the offshore industry and bring it across into the renewables sector, which is starting to happen now. So what's the kind of overall status? Okay, so our first benchmark is April 2018. The IMO came out with a strategy. I think a few of us on this call probably need to be reminded of that, the 2050 volume goals, 50% of 2008 levels, and the 2030 intensity goals. And there has been an associated ramp up of data collection by the IMO, by the EU, and by China and others, and an associated focus on how to go about regulating for this transition and what kind of funding needs to come in behind it, what kind of support the governments need to make. But as we stand at the moment, there's really honestly a negligible amount of shipping has converted to renewables in the grand scheme of things. And on top of this, the fourth greenhouse gas study recently released has highlighted to us that the IMO's jurisdiction really is over maybe 70% of shipping, the international part, and there's still 30% that needs to be dealt with by the more local regulation. And alongside all this, we have a lot of activity in the private sector in trying to aggregate data for energy efficiency and for helping the decarbonisation. But overall, the biggest problem is trying to find the right regulation to make this happen most efficiently. So I'll hand over to Sofia for
the main course. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the opportunities that we see for stakeholders to engage in a collaborative approach on decarbonisation. Just recalling a bit, what are the strategic movements happening currently on decarbonisation? Well, we have almost daily announcements right now about new partnerships, about new coalitions on alternative fuels. And we hear about the hydrogen strategies of the EU, of Norway, Japan, Australia. And over here in Denmark and in Copenhagen, where we sit, we have the national climate partnerships, and we have the Power-to-X Consortium. And so we feel that currently we are in a period of learning, a time of piloting, of testing, and of building coalitions. And we have these targets for 2030 and 2050, and we also have this growing understanding that these targets will still not meet the Paris Agreement. So how are we going to increase the speed of this transition, and what are the barriers that we have in front of us? Well, so there are two main uncertainties here, and they are on technology and on regulation. So anything that burns can potentially be used as a fuel in a ship, but how well suited are these various fuels for deep sea operation especially, and how suitable are they for scaling globally? And so there are uncertainties here with regards to the timing of this technology. When will they be ready? When will the infrastructure be ready? How long time will it take to scale this up? What are the costs and availability of these fuels? And what is the future impact of the value of the asset? And so there won't be any one fuel fits all. That's just not going to happen. Then we have the second problem on regulations. And so there we have this uncertainty of the definitions of the scope and of how it's going to be enforced, and what regimes and tools we have to validate this. How to validate net zero? How is that going to happen? And so we need regulations that are enabling a level playing field for sustainable and long-term operations. And we want our ships to be bankable assets, and that happens at an acceptable level of certainty. So what are the choices for a ship owner? Well, we are suggesting two different choices. The first one is to sit and wait. Sit and wait and see what happens. What engines are going to be developed? What ships are going to be what fuels are going to be available? And many smaller shipping companies or other actors, they don't really have any other option. But so how will the banks look at your asset in the future? And placing a bet on a new fuel, that's of course risky, but keeping with fossil fuel is going to be risky as well, because we can be sure of one thing, and that is that the decarbonization targets, they will only become tighter and tighter. So the second choice, that is to engage in strategic initiatives today to enable a more informed decision making. And this is about sharing risks and rewards. And that opportunity is up and down the value chain. And so we already see that energy companies, they are coming out with decarbonization targets as well. And last week we heard of BP joining forces with Norwegian Equinor on a wind farm in the US. So think about, for instance, how willing are cargo owners to explore the greener ton per nautical mile? What sectors have more difficulties with their scope 3 emissions? And what actors have more to gain from decarbonizing their supply chain than others? And who will be in desperate need of a green supply chain in the future? And so this is what we suggest you to do, to build consortia, to create coalitions, and look for partners to develop strategic direction together, because nobody can do this alone. So with that, Conor, I would like you to give them
so for dessert, I'll dig a little bit deeper into we'll dream a little bit about a consortium. You can argue with me about the technology side of this, but it's really just to get the juices flowing. For instance, we can go in all different directions to our stakeholders to try and form consortia, but here we're talking about alternative fuels. So let's start looking back up the value chain. So suppose you're interested in methanol, and you can you want to pair up with someone who's making say blue methanol from CO2 captured from another sector. And they need also hydrogen. So then they'll have to go and find some green hydrogen somewhere. The green hydrogen needs to be produced from green electricity, so they have to go up and find some green electricity somewhere. So you can see this building backwards up the value chain that needs to take place and that can take place. And you are sitting at the end so far of this chain. You're potentially supplying demand. So you may be of more interest than you think in this situation. So you could look at the similar situation for ammonia. You could be looking at someone who's producing blue hydrogen using LNG as a feedstock for steam reforming and then capturing the CO2. There's a lot of options here. They're just a small little snippet of just thought about it and how this relates upwards. So what do you do once you've started creating this thought process, and how do you decide where to go? What's interesting for you? So you got to start looking at what's your segment. What are you doing? Ferries, tankers, bulk, offshore. You know, what's your ideal fuel? Where are you trading? What's the availability looking like for the future fuel? Will it scale? Where is it trending geographically in the moment? What are your vessel characteristics? How big is it? What are your engine sizes? What's important to you? Volume or weight? Can you fit in odd new fuel tanks that have liquefied gases in them and things or not? How high is your power demand? Can you retrofit, or do you have to do it in a new build? Okay, so you go through the process of those thoughts, and what does that lead to? Well, who can you collaborate with on the technology? The engine manufacturers, the yards, as you were mentioning, and have you missed the bus? Maybe you've look at all these considerations, and when you go and try and find someone who wants to work with you, they're already working with somebody else. That is starting to become a risk. So what do you do with this value chain that you put together, this consortium you put together? Well, you're obviously going to try and take it to the bank. You're going to want to talk to banks or venture capitalists or people issuing green bonds, or there's all kinds of various financial options out there, blended finance. Going to have to try and come to them with some sort of business model which makes some sense to them, and then also reach out almost inevitably at the moment to government and other bodies who are yielding grant funding to try and close the inevitable business gaps you're going to find in this. Really, ultimately, when you start to see the formation of these kind of coalitions, you can then start to exert a little bit of political power. You can bring it to your customers, and you can even bring it to your end consumers. But one thing is certain: to get this transition going, and I see we're going to have the bells again soon, which says our 15 minutes chat time is finished. We're going to there we go. We're going to need a critical mass and an escape velocity. This is like two terms from physics, we're going to need enough projects happening in a short enough space of time to really make this transition happen. So maybe we'll just squeeze in a little bit of...
Yes, a little bit of wine pairing regarding how well do startups and corporates actually work together and complement each other. So we've mentioned the benefit of building consortia, but why are startups needed? Well, I think never before has shipping as an industry been so ripe for disruption. We have the digitalization, we have the decarbonization, we have the ocean economy synergies popping up, and we have this decoupling of asset ownership from the business of shipping. And micro innovators outside the corporate hamster wheel, they are actually needed here to bring in these new solutions that can drive things forward. And they are not limited by these organizational boxed-in cultures, so they are needed. But they also have some challenges, because startups, they don't necessarily speak the lingo of the corporates, and they don't understand the kind of the overall risk picture that the corporates have when they are evaluating collaboration with startups and evaluating their offerings. And so startups need to educate themselves on this. They need to understand this broader risk picture and how they can bring value here. But the corporates, they need to do something as well. They need to be more flexible. We need to get outside of this stalemate procurement situation, because a startup is a startup as long as it is exploring a scalable business model. Yeah. So while they are doing that, they don't belong in the procurement conversation. So to finish off, if the large corporate and the small startup dare to dance together, exploring opportunity on fair terms, there might be a good chance for a brilliant, bold and fruity Bordeaux coming out from that tango. So I was a little bit rushed there to keep within our allotted time, but here we have given you a snapshot of the current state of decarbonization and the barriers for change. We have given you a couple of options for action, and not least the opportunity of collaboration through coalitions. And we have given you a very tiny bit of the improvement opportunity that persists in the collaboration with startups and corporates. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sofia. Oh, I just have to put you up again. Like this. Here we go. Thank you so much, Sofia and Conor. I think I will be ready for my next dinner party to speak a little bit about decarbonization with my partner next to me. So, but I have a few questions, so I will be better prepared for doing my next dinner party. So my first question is, what about this new Maersk Zero Carbon Shipping fund that has been settled down now, conducted by Bo Seop Simonsen, who is a former colleague to both of you. What do you think about that? That is a collaboration between different stakeholders and so on. So have you an opinion about that one?
This is, of course, massively interesting, and something that I think all of us have wanted to see for some time, because collaboration at this higher level is absolutely necessary to progress these things forward. And also understanding that the coupling with the energy sector and the coupling with end consumers is absolutely necessary to kind of massage the business models and reducing the risk and reducing the cost. Shipping as an industry, they sit with 3% of global emissions, and that is a good size to be a catalyst for change, to assist also the wider sectors to decarbonize as well. But they are still not going to be able to do it alone. So the initiative now with the Zero Carbon Center it's really necessary, and we are very excited to see how this develops and progresses.
I mean, that's a good first step that came just right here a couple of months ago. So, But I will save my questions for later. So we already have a few coming from our audience. So let's start with Thea. She's asking, how is the maritime industry currently behaving towards starting the transition? That's a good one.
Yeah.
So Maersk is one of the moves that has been done. So a little bit in along to that one.
Yeah, there's various initiatives to try to pass on some of this cost to the customers. So I think from talking about Maersk, if I remember, IKEA and is it Nike and a few of these big customers are interested in sharing some of the cost of percentage biofuels, and that's not there. There's other actors as well doing similar things. But it's very difficult to get that value if you charge a premium for that. It's very difficult to get that value through the chain and back up to the ship owner first of all, because you have a lot of different actors in between. If you know what I mean, thinking about it that way instead of simply charging more for your product as a ship owner. But then the important point to note here is that there's an estimate of around 80% of the investment for the transition to the alternative fuels is not taking place with the ships, but taking place with the fuel suppliers. So you actually need to get that dollar all the way from the pair of Nikes right back to the fuel suppliers to make it work. And this is quite a big challenge. But this type of thinking kind of joined up thinking is starting to happen. Then we have a bit of an issue, as I think I mentioned, with validation options. There's an awful lot of different systems out there for validating what is efficiency indices. So you have TEU is used in the container sector. You have deadweight used in the reporting to the IMO. You have, and then you have actual transport work done to the EU. So there's a little bit of confusion about how all that's going to settle out.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of conversation is taking place with regards to the regulations. This is where the maritime industry is really engaging right now, because it's so important that this is done in not creating kind of skewed incentives and not a level playing field.
And the shipping complies first. First comply, then exceed if you can. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
So we have talk about the.
Maybe take another question.
Yeah.
We saw this with the global sulfur cap, because once IMO they gave a date for the global sulfur cap to be finalized. Then the ship owners, they were in compliance on 1st of January. Well, a few one wasn't, but the major part. So I definitely, I'm sure you're right that the IMO and regulation is one of the key drivers to make this happen.
Yeah, and there is also this growing insight that regulations are going to be too slow. So that as a responsible or strategic actor here, you need to assist the regulatory development by launching pilots that you can learn from, which can advise regulations.
Yeah, and there's a broader transition at work as well going on, and there's a macro situation which companies should be aware of. And there was recently some very interesting arguments during the weekend, actually, in The Economist, where they're running a series about climate change and its impact on business. And they are talking about watching out for the actual impact of climate change on your business, this physical impact of it. And we may think, well, ships, they're built to go through hurricanes. Yeah, well, there's a lot more to that. There's a lot more to that picture than just the ships, if you think of it that way. Then regulation. The regulation comes from governments, but it also comes from your, if you like, regulation in its broader sense, comes from the consumers and your customers as well. They will tend to regulate you. Then there's actually risk of litigation over climate change kicking in for big organizations, and I think there's been cases in Holland where people are being sued. And then there's the risk of being left behind technology-wise.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to see the bigger picture here.
And I think it's very welcoming to see also the suggestion from the EU to develop a kind of a mechanism to trace the carbon of transport, to make it more visible to the end consumer.
So happy Battery Day.
Yeah,
today is the big day of Tesla, where they later today are going to announce their battery news. So looking into the larger value chain and pointing into the question from Lena Goodbear, we are gonna look a little bit around. Why not look at the automotive industry, which has set up a lab where startups meet the big brands and also socialize with each other. So what do you think about the question from Lena? And happy battery day.
Yeah, I'm not aware of this specific initiative, but
okay.
For sure, there are lots of learnings here. If we especially look at the battery question, the innovation has happened in the car industry, and what can we bring with us to the...
But I think the question is about the interaction of startups and corporates and this kind of
socializing, like the informal idea that you will. Oh, okay, Lena just put up the website so everybody can have a look at that. But I think that Lena, she's thinking about where informal idea exchange will happen when you just socialize. Sometimes just having a nice chat, and then you'll come up with a bright idea, or you'll start a collaboration, and that's one of the things that I'm working on right now, is how to have more Slack in your daily life. So you will have the opportunity sometimes just to make thoughts happen to your head, because when we are all very busy, and then you're not creative, you're not even innovative, and that's a huge problem in our society, that everything is such under pressure that you can't be creative on command. So this is what happens sometimes in the socializing part.
Yeah, and this is also what I mean when I say that the corporates need to create more operational flexibility to allow for this space and this outside of the daily operations kind of thinking. It's necessary to bring in new ideas and to improve the collaboration.
Yeah, and there's the whole area of handling intellectual property and giving people what they justly deserve. And of course, if you do it socially like that, you start to build up trust, and trust is very important. This
is also what Lena's comment is. It's not so easy to be the startup speaking to the large tech department in the shipping companies. That's so right. So it's easier just to have a cup of coffee in a conference and say, hey, I'm working with this, and they'll say, okay, that's interesting. So that's the same also with the students. When we have interns at MDC, they think, but I'm not interesting for they will not speak with me. I'm only the intern. But I say, no, you're the future labor force. You're the one bringing in your ideas, fresh ideas when you come into the company. So yes, you are a very relevant player in all discussions. Don't fear to speak with people who are much above you in the hierarchy. No. Good. We have one last question, and that is in the ask a question part here. So it's Lene Mahler, and Lene is actually my intern here at MDC. So well done, Lene, that you'll ask a question. So she says, she asks, who do you think should be responsible for decarbonization in shipping? Ship owners, charter, or bunker suppliers? Good question. Well done, Lene.
This is a joint responsibility. Everybody has to do their part, and success is only going to happen if it's done collaboratively. That's what we think.
I agree. So then I have one last question for you. So what are the aspects to consider when selecting a fuel? That was one of my very concrete questions for you.
Yeah, so of course we have everything with regards to the technical feasibility, but what we see is that while that is essential, this is not where the biggest barriers are. It's more with regards to long-term availability, the safety of operation, safety to environment, to the ship and to the crew. We know, for instance, that ammonia is very toxic to inhale. That needs to be ensured. And some of these fuels actually have another environmental impact than climate change. So you mustn't create a new problem. And then it is about the time and cost of developing the infrastructure, and cost here, the uncertainty of costs and how this can be bridged and how you can finance your investments in an acceptable way.
Good. Lene, she is already giving you another question. So now she's got encouraged. She said, don't you feel that IMO regulations tend to only relay those responsibilities on the owners? charters. Oh, the time manager is there.
Yeah.
Charters and then they forget the suppliers. Very interesting question, Lena.
So,
very, very good. Yeah.
Yeah, this is true because IMO does not have the jurisdiction
No.
to do so.
Okay.
No, but if there's a lot of discussion about, well, with the IMO, we'll try to implement market-based measures, and I think though maybe they're not strictly in their purest sense. The idea of a carbon levy on fossil fuels will tend to, you can say that goes on the ship owners, but that will just push immediately straight back the value chain. So that will, these kind of measures, if they come in, will be kind of pretty evenly spread among everybody who has an interest in shipping, right?
I mean, the ship owners, they do have a lot of things always to comply with, and they also do sit back with all the expenses just on their shoulders, because after the global sulfur cap, now I know that they have another regulation to comply with about the cybersecurity that must be part of their annual surveys and so on from the 1st of January. And now this about the decarbonization is coming up. So it's a continuous ongoing request for compliance for the ship owners. So it's a tough life to be a ship owner, I think. There is a lot of but it's also a very important part of the value chain, of course, to especially for the decarbonization to handle that one, that problem together with the planes. That's another one. So what about collaboration with planes? Are we having any collaboration there in some of the fields with the airplane industry? With the airplane industry,
I heard someone mention that. Like anecdotally, someone said to me, "Well, if the aviation industry want to use us to offset, that'd be. Yeah. I'm going for it. So you can work out some interesting mechanisms for. Suppose you wanted to offset aviation emissions against efficiencies that you can apply to your ship using sails, for instance. But we have a validation issue with all that.
Yeah.
This is where we have to get this clearer.
But on the power to X opportunity, shipping and aviation are already collaborating, but that's on the fuel side.
Okay. I could continue with a lot of other questions, but we have to stick to time. It's at 32 minutes past 12 o'clock, and our time manager, Rådhusklokkerne, have already rang. I think I would love to move the Tidbit studio to your premises, because that would be a great start. Every time we do a Tidbit, to start up with Rådhusklokkerne, and then we know when the 15 minutes are gone, and then we know when we stop. So it's a wonderful place to be.
Henriette, you're very welcome, and the couch.
Yes,
yeah. It could be a new concept. So. Thank you so much, Sofia and Conor, for sharing your valuable insights about decarbonization. I hope everybody got a lot of new knowledge to carry on, and a lot of blod på tanden, as we say in Danish, to do these partnerships, and just to contact even people you don't dare to contact. Just go for it. Thank you so much to all of you for listening along. I know that we have had listeners from different parts of the world, Holland, US, and also some part of Asia. So it has been a very international Tidbit this time, one with 40 listeners. Wow, so the topic has a huge interest. Tomorrow, I hope to see you again. We have a buffet once again, but this time it will be a cruise buffet. I don't know how many of you attended Inger Klein Thorhauge. She was actually one of our very first Tidbit speakers. And she's back again in the studio tomorrow at 12 o'clock, where she's gonna tell her personal story about being captain on Queen Elizabeth, a ship with usually 3,000 passengers and around 1,200 crew. And she was on board for 5.5 months. So she was there during the tough Corona period from February all the way to July. So it's not long time since she came back to her house in Fyn. So that will be one of the more like talk tidbits tomorrow, but very interesting. I had a long talk with Inger yesterday. It was so interesting. If you have your lunch ready, for tomorrow at 12, do listen along. It's really a not to miss tidbit, and very seldom that you have insights from the cruise business here in Denmark, as we don't have any cruise ships in Denmark. So thank you, all of you, for being here, and hope to see you tomorrow for Inger Klein Thorhauge's tidbits. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.